At the during the last election, I made the election broadcast for my party, SLPP. And my promise to the electorate was that if they followed my government, I would lead them to independence within the lifetime of this House. The life of the House will expire next year, about July, but I might spring a surprise and arrange for election earlier. All I would want to do is return to electorate. I've done the duty which I promised you. This is what now let us go now to the electorate, and you'll decide what form of government you want.
Nationally renowned for his role as the architect of Sierra Leone's independence, Sir Milton Margai was born on December 7, 1895 at Gibangbatoke in the Moyamba district, just a year before the hinterland of the territory was formally declared a British protectorate. The eldest son of a prominent businessman, he was educated at a Christian missionary school in Bonth, Albert Academy in Freetown, Fora Bay College in Freetown, and the University of Durham in England, where he studied medicine. Milton Margai thereby became the first descendant from the protectorate to enter Fora Bay College and to become the first British-trained medical doctor. This in itself was a great personal achievement, honor and prestige for him, and it must have attracted great respect and admiration for him. In 1927, he returned home after successfully completing his studies abroad and entered the colonial government service as a medical officer. During his long medical career, he worked in almost all the districts in the then protectorate. Within that period, he was able to establish very good relationships with many paramount chiefs and other prominent people in the protectorate. This was later to prove valuable to him in his political career. Though he studied medicine in Britain, Milton Margai never strayed far from his roots in Sierra Leone. He also showed keen interest in the local development of his country. The welfare of women was of particular interest to him. In this regard, he embarked on the training of midwives through the Bondo Society. He realized that the Bondo Society was an integral part of the traditional and cultural practice of the women, and that all the women in the entire protectorate were involved in it and were seriously attached to it. He did not advocate the abolition of the practice, but used his medical training and knowledge to teach the women the healthier and safer way of carrying out their cultural practice. Though the colonial administration had declared the interior of Sierra Leone a British protectorate in 1896, the people in the protectorate did not have the same facilities as those in the colony until British colonial administrator Ransford Slater took over as governor and introduced a new constitution in 1924 known as Slater Constitution. The 1924 Slater Constitution extended the jurisdiction of the Legislative Council and Executive Council to include the protectorate. The colony was Freetown and its coastal area. The protectorate was defined as the hinterland areas dominated by local chiefs. The colony was occupied by the Creole people who were descendants of freed African American, West Indian and liberated African slaves, whilst the protectorate was occupied by the indigenous people of the region. The 1924 Slater Constitution made provision for elected representatives of the colony and nominated chiefs to represent the protectorate. In effect, this motivated the legal understanding for a united Sierra Leone, but with separate and different political systems constitutionally defined for each. Signs of translation of political awareness into organized political activity in Sierra Leone began in 1940, when Milton Margai organized a Council of Chiefs that met every year. Encouraged by political clout of the Council of Chiefs, in 1946, Milton Margai, John Karefa Smart and their supporters proceeded to form the Sierra Leone Organization Society (SOS) to represent the political interests of all Sierra Leoneans. Antagonism between the colony and the protectorate escalated to a heated debate in 1947 when the governor Sir Hubert Stevenson recommended changes through the Stevenson Constitution for a single political system for both the colony and the protectorate. The Stevenson Constitution gave protectorate members, who represented the greater part of the country, a majority seats in the Legislative Council. This action on the part of the British government against the negative socio-economic backdrop of the Second World War was an arrangement that affected the whole of British West Africa and was aimed at giving them autonomy under the Crown. When the 1947 Stevenson Constitution recommended changes to place political power in the hands of an official majority of the Legislative Council, crack began to emerge within the political fabric of Sierra Leone, to which the present crisis may be related. the Stevenson constitutional arrangement did not go down well with conservative Creoles, who since the 1920s had been aiming to succeed British rule in Sierra Leone. While they were the most educated and politically enlightened political group, their position was being challenged by the indigenous majority in the 1940s. As a result, the Creole monopoly on education and leadership in Sierra Leone eroded. The Creole people of the colony were very much displeased with the proposal of the constitution because they saw in it the domination of the colony by the chiefs of the protectorate. A protectorate majority in the legislature was seen as a threat not only to the power of the Creoles, but also to their Western way of life. The Creoles were not diplomatic enough in airing their grievance, for they came out openly and angrily that they did not want to be ruled by less advanced people interested in stealing Creole country, the colony. Apparently, the relatively more educated Creoles considered themselves to be more advanced than the indigenous societies of the protectorate, and saw themselves as the rightful owners of the colony, and not guests of the indigenous people. The Creoles therefore went all out from 1947 to 1951 to block the changes intended in the Stevenson recommendations. The 1947 Stevenson Constitution triggered the formation of political parties such as the National Council of Sierra Leone (NCSL) in 1950 and the Sierra Leone People's Party (SLPP) in 1951. In August 1950, representatives of all colony political groups except the Lamina Sanko's People's Party united to form the National Council of Sierra Leone (NCSL) under the leadership of Dr. Herbert Bankole Bright, an outstanding Creole, as their leader in order to prevent the implementation of the provisions in the Stevenson's 1947 Constitution. To checkmate, in April 1951, the indigenous people of the Protectorate formed the Sierra Leone Protectorate Party, SLPP, later changed to the Sierra Leone People's Party, SLPP, through the merger of the Sierra Leone Organization Society, SOS, the Protectorate Educational Progressive Union, PEPU, and the People's Party, PP, with Milton Margai as their leader to ensure the immediate implementation of the provisions of the Constitution. Milton Margai was not a man of immense physical stature or captivating physical appearance. He was a simple man. He did not ostentatiously display wealth or the trappings of his office. He was often seen wearing a pair of short trousers, driving his car on the streets of Freetown, or Bow or elsewhere in the then Protectorate, unaccompanied by any escort or security detail. He knew the entire country of Sierra Leone very well. He had a very distinguished, respected, and admirable career and track record of public service behind him. At the time he retired from government service in 1949 and entered politics in 1950. Milton Margai did not therefore have to boost up his own ego by being pompous and ostentatious. He did not have much difficulty in convincing Sierra Leoneans that he entered politics only with the aim of fostering unity throughout the entire country and for the purpose of promoting the well-being and prosperity of all Sierra Leoneans. In 1951, general elections were held in Sierra Leone. Both the NCSL, SLPP, and independent candidates contested the 1951 general elections. When the results were announced, it initially appeared that the NCSL had won more seats than the SLPP. However, all the independent members from the Protectorate later declared for the SLPP, placing the NCSL a distant second. Not surprisingly, the Creole leaders of the NCSL were so unhappy with the election results that in July 1952 they requested the colony to be seceded from Sierra Leone and be granted its own independence. As expected, their request was rejected by Britain. Milton Margai and his SLPP party members were allowed to sit in the newly constituted Executive Council. That same year, a new constitution was declared by Governor Stevenson's successor, Governor George Beresford Stuke. A major step towards self-governance, as the constitution increased the paramount chief's representation in the Legislative Assembly to 12, one for each district, a practice that prevails today. The 1951 Constitution allowed for the retention of British colonial institutions, such as the governorship and the civil service. This meant that the country was still governed by British officials and was not fully independent. However, the Constitution provided a framework for decolonization. In 1953, the colonial administration for the first time appointed a cabinet full of African ministers. Milton Margai served as Minister of Health, Agriculture and Forestry in the British colonial administration. In 1954, he was made Chief Minister. with the constitutional changes brought by the 1951 Constitution, Milton Margai and his SLPP associates were able to push the colonial government to establish a House of Representatives, replacing the Legislative Council in 1956. Parliamentary elections were held in May 1957. The SLPP won the most seats in Parliament, and Milton Margai was re-elected as Chief Minister by a landslide. Towards the end of 1959, he formed the United National Front, a coalition of all registered functional political parties in Sierra Leone, in order to negotiate with the British government for the independence of Sierra Leone. On April 20, 1960, Milton Margai led a 24-member Sierra Leonean delegation at constitutional conferences that were held with the government of Queen Elizabeth II and British Colonial Secretary in negotiations for independence held in London. After a successful completion of constitutional talks in London in 1960, British agreed to grant Sierra Leone independence under the SLPP rule, and the date was fixed for the 10th anniversary of the founding of the SLPP on April 27, 1961. Independence festivities were taking place mainly centered on the harbor area of Freetown. 3 days of public holiday was declared and the city was in party mood, with streets decorated with bunting and the new national colors everywhere. But the build-up was overshadowed by a state of emergency, declared following a campaign of sabotage by the opposition All People's Congress Party, APC. The party was urging that independence should be postponed until free elections have been held. The leader of the APC, Siaka Stevens, was arrested along with another prominent opposition leader, Isaac Wallace Johnson, and 16 other party members. They were accused of planning a general strike to coincide with the independence celebrations, and it was feared riots would break out if the strike went ahead. Milton Margai therefore declared a state of emergency and had them arrested and placed under house arrest in Freetown prior to the ceremony and released shortly afterwards. Ultimately, however, the transfer of power proved to be entirely peaceful. Sierra Leone formally achieved its independence from Britain and became a member of the Commonwealth of Nations on April 27, 1961, with Sir Milton Margai as its first Prime Minister. Thousands of Sierra Leoneans took to the streets in celebration. Sierra Leone was granted independence as a dominion. This meant that Sierra Leone was now an independent country with its own parliament and its own prime minister. However, Queen Elizabeth would remain the head of state. Queen Elizabeth and her husband, Prince Philip, visited Sierra Leone from November 25th to December 1st, 1961.
As they stepped ashore, he welcomed them again to Sierra Leone, and formal presentations began. Then, with her personal ensign as Queen of Sierra Leone flying for the first time from her car, Her Majesty, with the Duke of Edinburgh, drove through the clamorous streets of the capital to Fort Thornton, the Governor-General's residence, where she was to stay during her visit.
From the transition government consisting of Sierra Leoneans under Milton Margai from 1954 through April 1961, first as Chief Minister, then as Prime Minister, when the country gained full independence, peace and tranquility reigned in the country under Milton Margai's leadership. Security and the economy were reasonably stable. There was not any haste to replace senior British administrators in the civil service, the police force, the judiciary branch, or the military with Sierra Leoneans. Consequently, there were no subtle actions designed to discourage these British administrators and force them to retire. Many top British colonial civil servants remained after independence and served happily under Sierra Leonean ministers. Milton Margai's policies may best be described as make haste slowly, and his cabinet might best be described as balanced. He appointed ministers based on his assessment of their abilities for the posts and, at the same time, focused on creating national balance. In May 1962, Sierra Leone held its first general election as an independent nation, and Milton Margai was re-elected as Prime Minister. As Prime Minister, Milton Margai had great respect for traditional authority. This was not surprising, having regard to the fact that he hailed from a ruling house, and perhaps because he had learned the secret of the success of the colonial administrators who made good use of the traditional authority in the administration of the protectorate. He attached great importance to age, maturity, and experience. He had been knighted by the Queen of England in 1959. Milton Margai's astute leadership made Sierra Leone achieve independence in a relatively peaceful manner as compared to the situation that obtained in other British colonial territories seeking independence at about the same time. With his age, his experience and knowledge of the country, Milton Margai's thoughts were grave, deeper and fewer. He had earned for himself the trust and the confidence of the people, and when he spoke about what the country needed to do to prosper, they listened to him and cooperated with him. He was not arrogant or boastful in his speech even to those who were less endowed with the knowledge, education, or experience as he had. He was realistic and practical, and very cautious in taking decisions. He was not an ebullient or great public speaker. He did not inspire people by his voice, and he was even accused of dozing off at meetings, especially at international conferences. Milton Margai was not an immense advocate for mass participation in politics. He believed in the rights of every man and woman, including the ordinary man or woman, but he did not believe in the wisdom of the ordinary man and woman. He saw it as his own duty to promote and defend their rights. That was why his party, the Sierra Leone People's Party, SLPP, under him worked mainly through paramount chiefs, opinion leaders, and other experienced and mature persons, and was regarded as an elitist party. He preferred having consultations and listening patiently to different views on any matter. He would then assess those views and make his own deliberate decision on the matter, having those views in mind. Once he made a decision, he stood firmly by it. Milton Margai was not vindictive, nor did he begrudge his political opponents or rivals. During his administration, Milton Margai practiced democracy and good governance. He was not ostentatious to the point of displaying his already legitimately acquired affluence and to the point of extolling material acquisition above all else. His humility and respect for other Sierra Leoneans was well acknowledged. This attitude and behavior could have permeated most of Sierra Leone society, and the general hope that at independence Sierra Leone was on the path to becoming a prosperous, modern and democratic state could very well have been fulfilled had his administration lasted longer. Milton Margai's behavior and attitude can be contrasted with that of a number of politicians who came after him. He was, for instance, not vindictive even to his political opponents, nor did he begrudge them, but tried to be fair, kind and polite to all of them and, without threats, tried to bring them to his own point of view. For instance, he did not victimize his younger brother, Albert Margai, who challenged him for the leadership of the SLPP with a view to him, Albert Margai, instead of Sir Milton becoming leader of the party and subsequently Prime Minister, or even when he, Albert Margai, broke away from the SLPP to form, together with Siaka Stevens, an opposition party called the People's National Party, PNP. Milton Margai demonstrated and promoted political tolerance in many significant ways. For instance, when his long-standing political opponent and critic Herbert Bankole Bright died, Milton Margai contributed to his funeral expenses as it became necessary for him to do so. His government gave personal loans to opposition politicians who were in need and requested such loans. In two critical areas relating to the promotion of democracy and good governance, Milton Margai, as a political leader, displayed his democratic credentials and good governance style by his own personal example. Those areas were in the conduct of public elections and in the management of corruption. Opposition candidates were able to campaign freely everywhere in their constituencies all over the country. The practice of using thugs, violence, or threats against political opponents or against their party officials or agents or party offices, or for any political purposes during elections or at any other time did not exist during his regime and was unimaginable. Up to 1962 at election time, the country was in a kind of carnival mood until, and even immediately after, the final results were announced. In the case of the management of corruption during Milton Margai's administration, even though there were not any formal anti-graft bodies or institutions such as anti-corruption commissions, anti-corruption strategies, or even integrity societies as they exist today, corruption in public affairs was then hardly known or heard of, or it was appropriately, adequately, and promptly dealt with whenever and wherever it was discovered. This was so because the leadership of the country at the time was beyond corruption, and that example itself was a deterrent, which was potent enough to prevent corruption in the public service and for all public servants and others to follow. Milton Margai did not directly or indirectly impose any restrictions or hold out any threat of imposing punishment on members of the ruling party for associating with or for visiting members of any of the opposition parties. Nor were public servants penalized or removed from their positions for associating with or for making social visits to friends or relations who were perceived to be members of opposition parties. Milton Margai set himself the example by associating with his political opponents, thereby demonstrating that disagreement in politics or on political issues should not amount to dislike or hatred among Sierra Leoneans, nor should it destroy friendly relationships. In 1962, Siaka Stevens, by then leader of the opposition, was part of the Sierra Leone delegation to the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York. Siaka Stevens was then a strong opponent of Milton Margai, and through his organization, the Election Before Independence Movement, EBIM, the precursor of the All People's Congress, APC, he had vehemently opposed the granting of independence until after the general elections of 1962. Milton Margai blazed a trail in the area of democratic and good state governance in independent Sierra Leone. The hope then was that the political leaders coming after him would become living examples of his style of state governance, and that they would demonstrate to all the same examples of personal integrity, honesty, and probity in public affairs, which the whole nation would have emulated and which would have become part of the national culture. Milton Margai was universally renowned even to his political adversaries for his integrity and probity, and as a man beyond reproach. He was not acquisitive, and he was never accused of acquiring wealth illegally either for or by himself or through his cronies, proxies, family members, or friends or persons associated with him. That practice started to be in vogue only after his death. It fully blew out into the endemic corruption which has long earned notoriety for Sierra Leone after Milton Margai's regime. Milton Margai was well known, highly respected by the people of the Protectorate and by even his opponents in the colony, as well as by the paramount chiefs with whom he had interacted over the years. The political party SLPP, which he headed, was formed in 1951 in collaboration with paramount chiefs and with the northern paramount chief, Bai Faramatas II, of Cambia district as deputy leader of the party. Sierra Leone was then relatively prosperous and peaceful during the tenure of office of Milton Margai. He was not known for nepotism or for encouraging it. Democracy was thriving as it was bound to happen, as Milton Margai himself had a democratic personality. Sierra Leone was then said to have made a good start at independence. There was therefore real hope that things would continue to be better and the country would become prosperous and remain peaceful. Milton Margai assumed an iconic position in Sierra Leone's political history. His dream was to see all ethnic groups, men and women, grow with equal rights and opportunities and with tolerance to one another. His style of governance was towards this end. Sierra Leoneans would have been living in prosperity and enjoying peace if the country's successive leaders had followed the inspiration and example Milton Margai left behind. But he appears to have been betrayed, and more than half a century after independence, the country still does not enjoy sustainable peace and prosperity and is still rated the poorest country on earth. Milton Margai died on the April 28, 1964. A day after the celebration of the 3rd anniversary of Sierra Leone's independence. He left the country only 3 years old, and in peace and relative prosperity,